So, welcome back to another episode of Storytelling on the Plains. Today we're going to do a little bit different. We're going to have a couple of short stories together here because while they're all interesting, they don't quite make up a full episode, at least with the information I've been able to find out about them. So they're all related, and I decided to put them together. I was actually looking at some other information for a story that I wrote for a couple of weeks from now, and I came across this information and just started researching to find the information. And I realized that the date of the episode, it's about a plane crash during World War II here in Nebraska, and the anniversary is June 7th, and I just happened to look at the calendar and saw that June 7th is the date that our next episode is going to go out, so I spent as much time as I could researching to get it up on the anniversary. And we also just had Memorial Day a couple of weeks ago, so I thought it'd be a good idea to remember some of the servicemen that lost their lives literally in the Panhandle. We're going to cover 3 airports in a series of vignettes, since they were all former military air bases as well in this area. So we're going to start with Chapel, Nebraska, which is about 100 miles from Scottsbluff, and it's about a 90-minute drive.
Have you been to Chapel?
I have been there once, but I really want to go down and see all this stuff now that I've learned about it.
Yeah, I think I've been there once or twice, but it is kind of a really weird, like out of nowhere kind of town. There's not much to it.
Yeah, and so I laugh at the 90-minute drive because you know I'm probably going to make it in less time than that. But on June 7th, 1944, it was the scene of a tragic plane accident. Early that morning, a B-24J bomber, number 44-40758, because you know people want to know that, was flying west from the Lincoln Army Air Base. The servicemen on board were all on their way to another World War II assignment. They were going to land on the West Coast and then travel on to the Pacific Theater. And this particular B-24 was one of 15 that left the base that day. So they were all going to the West Coast, and then they were going to go on to the Pacific Theater. And there's a bronze plaque at the memorial site that states the bomber caught fire and circled Chapel before it crashed. And when I read that, because I was looking for something else, and I was looking at state historical markers in the state, because History Nebraska actually has a whole section with all of the markers on it. So I was looking for something else, and I came across this. And when I read that it caught fire, circled Chapel, and crashed, I started looking for more information. So while they were flying en route to the West Coast, the plane had an internal fire, and it was thundering and lightning outside, but officials were never able to figure out how the fire started. It could have been struck by lightning, it could have been something else.
Isn't that kind of crazy, though? To this day, the most of that I hear, at least as a civilian of the United States, who doesn't get a lot of outside information as far as war and combat information, but you always hear about how we get crashes here in the United States. I think we had almost 2 or 3 Apache helicopter crashes by our own U.S. servicemen that led to deaths, and it's really weird how that happens quite a bit.
Yeah,
it's because the training is dangerous. Because once you get up there, obviously you can't make a lot of mistakes before it's too late.
Yeah,
but, yeah.
And so because of how it crashed and, how destructive the crash was, maybe today, with today's technology, they could figure out what started the fire, but we can only guess. So when I did some more research, I found a April 24th, 2019 article by 1011 News. And for folks that aren't familiar, that is a big news station back in Lincoln. I believe they're based out of Lincoln, either Lincoln or Omaha. Right. Lincoln,
yeah. I think it's Lincoln.
So their research, they found that the plane descended from 15,000 to 500 feet and then circled in the area. So to me, that says they probably knew about the fire. Maybe we're trying to put it out, because you're not going to go from 15,000 to 500 and then circle if you're all already dead. So at least at that point, I'm guessing they're still alive. And sometime between 4:30 and 4:45 a.m., the plane exploded in air. The article reported that the fuselage came down, the outboard motors were blown off, and they were as much as a half a mile away from the crash of the airplane in each direction. That's a huge crash.
It is. And again, it happens all the time, Joe, to this day.
Mm-hmm.
You have all sorts of weird crashes that happen.
Yeah. I read, I want to say it was a month or so ago, I think it was in North Carolina. It just got changed from Fort Bragg. What is it?
You got me there.
They just changed the name of it, but I believe that they had a crash a few months ago.
Yeah,
during a training incident.
Yeah, there's been I heard a lot about the helicopters, to the point where I think the U.S. Army suspended all helicopter deployment until future training was implemented.
Yeah.
It was that much of a problem recently that's happened.
And I've read in the past as well, like within the last 20 years of, plane X, we're not flying it anymore because we need to find out what this fault is.
Yep.
And we don't want any more people dying, so we need to fix this fault before we can fly anymore. So, I mean, it does happen. So this plane crashed in a field near a farm between what is now Interstate 80 and the village of Chapel. Witnesses saw the plane descend, and, you think about that, it was between 4:30 and 4:45, 1944. It was all farmers that were awake at that point in time. It's not going to be you or me out there seeing that happen early in the morning.
This is a B-24J bomber. This is not a small plane.
Yeah.
These planes are huge.
And can you imagine you're watching that descend, and then you see it explode?
Oh, yeah. I mean, you could see it's definitely not a small plane crash.
Yeah. Debris was reportedly found in an area from Chapel to Sedgwick County, Colorado. And so I went and I looked it up. To give you an idea, Julesburg, Colorado is in Sedgwick County, and it's the closest town over the border of Nebraska into Colorado, which is about 17 miles from Chapel. So they found debris 17 miles away.
Yep.
The medical report stated that all 10 servicemen died instantly, and I'm going to read off the names of the servicemen who passed away just because, it's the anniversary of their death, and we're just a couple weeks away from Memorial Day. So the historical marker lists the servicemen as Second Lieutenant Donald S. Wallace of Peculiar, Missouri, Second Lieutenant Colin A. Holland from Waynesboro, Mississippi, Second Lieutenant Frank K. Duffy, Cranford, New Jersey, Second Lieutenant Paul E. Rose, Mammoth Springs, a.k.a. Alaska, right? Staff Sergeant Robert E. Rogers, Camilla, Georgia, Staff Sergeant Vance C. Johnson, Stromsburg, Nebraska, Sergeant Bernard T. Clark, New York, New York, Sergeant Ralph A. Young, Anadarko, Oklahoma, Sergeant Peter L. Zamboto, Rochester, New York, and Master Sergeant William E. Webster, Oneonta, New York. They were all members of the 866th Bombardment Squadron H, 7th Air Force.
And you were right, 8K is Alaska.
It is Alaska,
It is
okay.
Alaska.
The A's throw me for whatever
they do
reason.
Too, me, all the time.
That's the handy-dandy technology of cell phones you can check in the middle of your podcast. Yep. So the memorial at the actual crash site has been there since 1952. It began with a tree planting in the pasture by the mother of one of the pilots. From there, chapel residents and other organizations took up the mantle to commemorate the tragedy. The chapel community erected memorial crosses with the names of the servicemen in their hometowns. And there's also a flag which flies above those crosses, and the VFW maintains the site. A replica of the B-24J bomber that crashed was made by Terry Hinde. It's Hinde. I'm assuming the E is pronounced. He's a metal artist from Julesburg, Colorado, and that was placed in Chapel Lake Park. Yep. Sorry, I got a little distracted.
No problem.
My cat is purring on my lap right now.
Well, and for our viewers, if you are willing to take a little further trip down the road east, we have the SAC Museum, the Strategic Air Command Museum. It is between Lincoln and Omaha, and that actually, I believe, does have a real B-24J bomber, as well as many other planes, if you are a plane enthusiast.
Yeah, that it's awesome.
I went there several times as a kid. It's amazing. So if you get the chance, and if you're, like I said, if you're one of those people, we here in Scottsbluff, actually, we have an air show as well. I'm not sure what all gets placed here, but
the airport appreciation days.
Yeah. We do have several old time warplanes that come by.
I think there is.
Yeah.
There's a bomber that comes, but I'm not a plane expert.
I'm not either, so I don't know exactly what bomber it is, but it is a World War II bomber, I believe.
Yeah. And if I remember correctly, they fly it in from the base in Cheyenne.
Yep.
I forget when they hold it now. It's sometime in the summer. Yeah.
It's before hot air balloon. The hot air balloons come up. So that's another thing we'll have to do is the hot air balloons. And everything that happens there.
I hate hot air balloons.
Why?
I don't know. I don't like them.
Well,
Probably because of what I was made to do when I worked at the Star Herald, and I just kind of got a distaste for it.
Oh.
Maybe we'll.
I think they're quite magical.
Okay.
Personally.
All right. When I win the lottery, I'll rent one out, and we'll take you up in one.
There you go. I just want one ride. I'll be okay.
There you go. So as we remember the anniversary of this day, I also wanted to add that Western Nebraska had 2 airfields during World War II. Fort Robinson had an airstrip, which you can still see if you're high enough up. My advice is if you go up to Fort Rob, take the Jeep ride at the fort during the summer and learn about it, because they'll take you all the way up, and you're standing up on a butte, and you can look down and you can see where the airstrip was. Mm-hmm. It's really difficult to pick out when you're on the ground. And I also don't know much about it at the moment, but you and I have planned to go up to the fort, so we're going to have to go up one day, and I'll just go up and turn my recorder on, let the person talk, and we'll get all the information. Mainly because the one time I have been on the Jeep ride, I didn't listen to the person that was there, and from what I understand, they didn't work there all summer.
They were given that little pamphlet that every tourist gets in, and here it's like, okay, you read this real fast and blurt it back out to the tourists, and there you go.
And he had started talking about the Cheyenne breakout, and I had already researched that extensively and written articles and spoke to folks in the Northern Cheyenne tribe, and he didn't have his information correct. So when he started talking about the airstrip, I just stopped listening. So
I don't know what you're talking about, buddy.
Yeah, so I was like, I don't want to listen and get wrong information. So I don't actually know a lot about the airstrip other than it was there during World War II, and it's not now, and you can see it from up there.
And to our viewers, we do not plead that we're always right, by the way. I mean,
Yeah, I make mistakes.
We always make mistakes. So, I mean, if you guys are welcome to call us out anytime, because we understand that we make mistakes. That's why we don't, at least I don't qualify myself as an expert.
Yeah. And I tried finding some information about the airstrip online, and there's nothing out there. And I know it was there. So the 3 people I knew that worked long-term at the monument aren't there anymore. So, I'm also writing this between 1 and 7 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't have anybody that I knew I could call up on the phone to get some information, and I don't even know if they know much information about it. So,
and I guess it makes sense because during World War II, you didn't want to give out any information for stuff like this. That was really just airports, landing strips out in the middle of nowhere. So it's safe to land your stuff, your planes.
And I don't know if they were just training out there or they were bringing supplies. I don't know. I know the railroad was still coming in through there at that point in time. Yep. So I don't know how they were getting their supplies in and out. They could have been cars, it could have been train, it could have been plane, it could have been all 3.
But also to this day, if you travel south of the Wildcat, you'll see missile silo bases all the way back almost to the Wyoming County line.
And a lot of them are still in use.
In use.
But which ones, Connor?
My trick was look for the porta potties. Look for those porta potties. If you see the ones without the porta potties, there's a good chance, and some weeds.
Yeah.
They usually just give up. But if you see a porta potty and it's nicely trimmed, there's a good chance that it's still in use. I do not suggest that you
no.
Go anywhere near these places, folks.
No.
You have no idea how fast these people are to come down on you. They will come down on you hard. So don't do it. Don't just look at it. There's not much to look at. It's just a.
It's literally just some square fencing.
It's just square fencing.
Yeah. And a porta potty.
And what clearly looks like a missile silo.
Yeah.
I mean, it has like the stereotypical. What looks like it will slide out.
Yes.
and a missile will pop up and just go. So there's several of those still here.
And I know of one that is in use because the porta potty's there.
Yep.
And that's when you take the back road from Scotts Bluff to Cheyenne. Do you know the one that I'm talking about?
I think so.
Yeah. I think it's the only one on that road. And I've driven by it, and I was going to say I've seen the porta potty move, but not while I was driving by. Like, I've driven by before and it's been on the right side. And then another time I've driven by and it's like 15 feet forward, and another time it's on the left side. So I'm like, someone's cleaning this thing out. So it's probably in use.
And I'm sure these silos were built well after World War II. They're probably built more during Vietnam. And that kind of the
Cold War era,
and I think that's the era that these silos come from. But they're still out there, and you can see them. So
just do not go on the property.
Nope.
So Alliance, Nebraska is about a 75-minute drive from Scotts Bluff. Its airport has an interesting history. So during World War II, the U.S. Army was searching for a site for an airfield near Alliance. And in 1942, they settled on a location which was ideal for all of its needs. The Secretary of War, which I love that, I don't want to say I love that we have a Secretary of War, but that title just says you don't have to question, what's that guy's job? We know what he's doing. The Secretary of War authorized the establishment of the airfield on April 14, 1942. And so by July, 4 nearly 9,000-foot runways were completed. The project was completed in August 1943, so it took a little over a year. And on August 22nd, 65,000 people attended the dedication of the Alliance Army Airfield. Building the Alliance Army Airfield had one major drawback. The town had less than 7,000 people, and more than 5,000 workers descended on the area to work.
The reason that they put the airfield, at least I imagine the reason they wanted an airfield in Alliance, is because that's where the railroad was at. One of the main railroad hubs at that time was in Alliance, one of the largest.
Connor read ahead in our notes.
Oh, yeah, maybe.
He was,
I didn't. I just knew that one.
okay. But yeah,
I used to live in Alliance.
Your guess is
So,
right.
Yeah.
So the town size doubled, and it caused a housing crisis. According to the Alliance Airport's website, workers moved into garages, storerooms, cellars, attics, and even their own trailers in established parks. The cantonment housing area of the airfield covered 1,088 acres and supported 775 buildings and other structures. Some were built of brick and steel, such as aircraft hangars. However, most were of frame construction, sitting on top of poured concrete foundations. Tar paper and plywood were generally used for walls and flooring, as the buildings were considered temporary at best, only to be used for a few years. In addition, the airfield utilizes a railroad spur, power plant, waterworks, and sewage system, as well as a total of 35,503 feet of runways. The airfield had been planned as a training facility for paratroops and air commandos, which needed long runways for C-47 Skytrains to tow gliders. That word paratroops, it shows up a lot on their website, and I've always been taught paratroopers, so I kind of stumbled on that because I'm like, I wanted to say paratroopers, but I'm reading an actual quote, so I have to read it the way it was written. So anyway, if you want to know the specifics of these types of planes, air crews trained on the C-47 and C-53 transports and CG-4 gliders. That means absolutely nothing to me.
It's okay.
I just figured I'd put it in because I know people always ask, well, what kind of gliders?
Yeah.
Oh, no, the ones without engines. So between the opening of the airfield and the spring of 1944, the I Troop Carrier Command, 434th Troop Carrier Group, commanded the airfield. The 411th Army Air Force Base Unit commanded the support elements at Alliance as part of the Air Technical Service Command. In addition to the C-47s, the unit repaired B-17 Flying Fortresses and the B-24 Liberator aircraft from other airfields. The airfield was home to as many as 14,000 paratroops in the area, using C-47 Skytrains as powered troop carriers and the CG-3, CG-4 Waco glider troop carriers for the training aircraft. The sandhills were thought to provide a softer landing than wooded areas for jumping paratroops.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
I guess if I had to pick a place, a wooded area or out here in the middle of nowhere, I could probably pick out here.
Yeah. And when we get to the Scottsbluff area or airport, there's a reason why some folks have chosen that as well, but I don't want to spoil it. We'll get to that a little later in this episode. So the Alliance Municipal Airport website has a list of all the carrier groups that trained here before heading off to Europe. I can read them to you if you want. Do you want me to read them?
Let's go for it.
Okay. So known units that trained at the Alliance...
AAF?
Yeah, and I was going to say what AAF was, and then I forgot what it was already, so...
Is it Alliance Air Force?
The Alliance Army Air Force. So, Alliance Army Air Force.
I don't know.
Yeah. So, known units that trained here were the 403rd Troop Carrier Group, the 434th Troop Carrier Group, the 436th Troop Carrier Group, the 439th Troop Carrier Group, 440th Troop Carrier Group, 442nd Troop Carrier Group, 349th Troop Carrier Group, 443rd Troop Carrier Group, and the 10th Troop Carrier Group. And that's pretty much in order of when they were here, not in
pretty random
numeric
numbers.
Well, the highest one I got here is 442nd, so they had 442.
Well, and that's a troop. How many people are in a troop?
Oh my God, dude! I'm not a military person.
We have to have a military person. They used to tell me. I used to know, but I can't remember how many people are in a troop.
Yeah, because you got what?
It's more than one.
You got squad. And I can't tell you how many's in a squad or a platoon or a unit.
I'm the same way. I have no idea. I have no idea.
No clue. You know, if I was in charge of the Army, I would know that stuff,
Yep.
but I'm not, so... So by the time the paratroopers arrived, there was a critical housing shortage. Chimney Town, a federal housing project of apartment complexes, was constructed on the eastern end of Alliance. It was named such due to the stucco walls, coal heating stoves, and rows of chimneys along the roof line. After the paratroopers left, the 2nd Air Force used the airfield during the fall of 1944 to train B-29 crews. These folks learned how to drop bombs as well as read navigational, aeronautical, and bomb sight equipment. During the summer of 1945, the 1st Troop Carrier Command returned to the airfield for training. Their mission was to prepare for the proposed invasion of Japan, but it was never implemented due to the Japanese surrender on September 6th. Soon after, the military deactivated the airfield. There was speculation the Army would make the airfield a huge military base, but that was not to be. On November 20th, the airfield was permanently closed, and plans were made to sell off any surplus property.
Yeah, it is. And I think most people who would understand their way with the Army would understand why it closed. There's just... it's needed here in the interior of the United States for training, and it's good for training, but once you don't need to train people anymore, there's really no reason to have it this far inland. I mean, we're right in the smack dab middle of the United States almost, so
Yeah.
there's really not, you stick it to the east side or the west side, but you don't really go much further.
While the City of Alliance was one entity that wanted to purchase the property, Congressman A.L. Miller said it should be reactivated for training, especially since the U.S.-Soviet relations were not ideal. So that kind of makes sense.
Yep, we're starting into the Cold War for those who are interested in history.
The government said no and negotiated with the City of Alliance. The process took several years, and in the meantime, the government removed the railroad tracks and auctioned off 240 buildings. The U.S. government and the City of Alliance finally came to an agreement on July 16, 1953. The land and the remaining buildings that hadn't been sold off would eventually become the Alliance Municipal Airport. So on to Scottsbluff, which I know a little bit more, and I could probably still learn more about it. I've probably forgotten more about the airport since I left the paper, because, I don't have to keep that stuff in my head and reference it all the time anymore. So It just kind of goes in long-term storage, and my brain just never pulls it out anymore. So what do you know about the airport, Connor?
I know that taking a trip from there to Denver is terrifying. I remember one particular trip where I was shoved into, I can only describe as a tin can with wings on it, and there was turbulence the whole way. It was just shaking and shaking. I had never been more terrified in my entire life to be on that plane.
So have you flown there since United has the route, but they're running as something express? But have you taken the jet there that only takes 26 minutes?
Oh, no.
Okay,
Mine was from here to Denver to Chicago, because I was ending up in Chicago.
Okay, so I have been on one of those planes that you were on, and we were coming back from Denver to Scottsbluff, and I went to slide down in the seat because I was sitting too upright. And so I wanted to slide down a little bit, and when I slid down a little bit, the bottom of the seat came out with me.
Oh, no.
And the plane shaking and rattling, and I just looked at my husband and I'm like, are we gonna make it? I was so happy to get off that flight. It was slightly terrifying because
they didn't have any of the panels that you would see in an airplane. It was like a skeletal structure of an airplane. Almost, to me, it was something Indiana Jones.
Oh my God, your flight was worse than mine.
Oh
then.
No, my plane didn't look like a plane that should be flying people. It looked like a plane that should be flying like mail or cattle or something like that.
Okay.
It didn't look like it was meant for people at all.
Okay, so yours looked more like a cargo plane then.
It did. It looked exactly like a cargo plane. It had like this silver tin or galvanized metal on the inside. It wasn't paneled or anything. It
was my
terrifying.
God.
Yeah.
That's way worse than what I had. Okay. But yeah, they have jets right now, but contracts are up, blah, blah, blah. I'm not here to talk about the politics of the airport, but yeah, they've had some scary flights out there. So according to Western Nebraska Regional Airport, the first landing strips in Scottsbluff are believed to exist since about 1928 in a private pasture. So that's kind of where its very beginnings came from. Wikipedia notes that the original airport opened in 1934 with a hangar, commercial airline connections, airmail service, lighted fields, a weather bureau station, and a pilot training facility. There is a pilot training facility out there now. I believe the fields are still lit. I think that's a federal requirement.
They were just redoing the fields out at Kimball, Nebraska. They were. I was driving past not too long ago, and they were redoing.
They're working
fields.
on those,
Yep.
and I know recently the Scottsbluff Airport got approved for their contract. They're redoing one of their runways, and that was to give you an idea how long that takes. That proposal, so they filled out all the information they needed to give to the government while I was still working at the newspaper, and we're coming up on 4 years of me not being at the paper, and it was just like 2 months ago that they got to go ahead to start with that. So
that's crazy.
This stuff takes absolutely way too long to get done. And that was one of the things, because I used to cover the Airport Authority Board, and they would mention something, let's say in October, and then in June, oh yeah, we're going to finally start this project. And I'm like, what?
It makes it very interesting because, I mean, Dubai is already talking about like flying taxis and flying cars and like all the things that we're doing now with drones. But we have all these airports out in the middle of nowhere, but I don't think any of them are really equipped to handle that kind of technology or that kind of stuff. Yeah. So it'll be very interesting in the future if the United States will probably be the last one to catch up on flying cars.
Or they'll move on to something else and we'll skip the cars altogether.
Maybe. Dubai, for all its faults, and it has many, many faults, but for what it is as a city, it has some brilliant futuristic things that they do there.
I'm really torn because I would like to go there to see these things, but like you can't go there, I can't go there.
Yeah, I can't go there.
And that kind of sucks, you know. And then I get torn because I'm a big Formula One fan, and I would like to go to some, you know, because there's a race in Bahrain and there's a race in Saudi Arabia, and again, I can't go there.
Well, they had the World Cup in Qatar. That's not the same area, but still,
it's still Middle East.
Middle East, yeah.
There's a lot of places that aren't safe for me to go, and even on as we get really sidetracked here, even on Reddit, every now and then in the Ask Reddit subreddit, people will say, you know, what's a great place to go but isn't really safe, and every single time Egypt comes up, and it's Egypt, especially if you're a woman, and I'm like, well, that sucks. And I've seen people say, well, what if I'm holding hands with my husband and I'm going with my husband? And people who live in Cairo are like, oh no, that's still not safe. And they'll go into details. And, you know, I majored in anthropology. I've always wanted to go see the pyramids and all the stuff there. And I'm going, am I ever going to be able to do that?
And how much of it is it like what you read versus the truth? I have heard lots of bad things about Mexico, but I've been to Mexico, and I have to say my experience is much, much different.
I would like to hope maybe in a few years when I'm all old and gray, if I went, they would leave me alone.
Maybe that's a trick.
Yeah, they'll just be like, oh, old lady, let her go.
Yeah, it's just like, she got nothing.
And I've still got a huge list of other places I want to go.
Oh, yeah.
But it's just amazing how some of those things keep cropping up. But anyway,
back to the airports.
Back to our airports out here. The inland airlines provided air service through Scottsbluff from Cheyenne, Wyoming to Rapid City, South Dakota, Spearfish, South Dakota, and Pierre, South Dakota with a Boeing 247 beginning August 1940. And I seem to recall, I didn't really pay much attention, but when I moved here, I think they were still flying to those places.
I could imagine. For those who can afford it.
Yeah.
It's not common out here, folks, for us to fly, especially when Rapid City is only three hours away.
Yeah, and Denver's 3 hours the other way.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a huge deal just to rent a car and drive. I don't know a whole lot of people that fly.
I used to fly out of here when they went to the jets from those scary, oh my God, are we going to die before we get there planes. Because my husband insists on parking in the covered garage in Denver, and we would go on vacation for 10 days, it actually worked out to be about $15 to $20 more for each for us to fly out of here. So for less than $50, to me it was worth it because we're flying to visit his family in England or flying to visit friends in Greece. And when I come back from there, the last thing I want to do is get in a car and drive home.
Well, and that's, I think, me and my husband has been that way too, is we've kind of come to some cities like Minneapolis where we just want to fly into the interior of the city, and we can, between Uber and public transportations, you can get wherever you really want to go. So there's no need to drag your car up there. But like the other thing we love to do is the national parks. So you kind of
have to have the car.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of wondering about the next time I fly home to New York, because I used to be able to fly into Newburgh Airport, and it's people that have been around for a while at Stewart Airfield. And Stewart was an Air Force base. It still is an Air Force base, but it had the commercial side. And when COVID hit, United Airlines stopped flying out of there. The only flights out of Newburgh now go down to Florida. And I don't want to fly from here to Denver to Florida back to New York. So if I'm going to fly, I have to go to Newark. And that's an hour and a half from my hometown. And my mom is going to be 76 this year. So I'm like, what are we supposed to do when we fly? Are we going to then rent a car? Can I get somebody else to pick me up? And I'm like, I got to figure this out before we fly again, because my mom hates driving in big cities, and she hates Newark. She was so happy when I could fly into Newburgh, and that's not possible now. And I did look up Ubers, and they're just way too expensive. So I was glancing the other day about there is a rail line over to Hoboken, and you can catch New Jersey Transit from Hoboken back to my hometown. So my mom would only have to go to the train station in my hometown to get me. We're thinking maybe next year we'll be able to go visit, because I haven't seen her in almost 10 years.
Oh, yeah.
Because we used to take a vacation, go visit my mom, take a vacation, go visit my husband's parents, and then, rotate that way. And then Paul's mom passed away, then we got COVID, then Paul's dad passed away, and we haven't had a vacation since 2019. So we're like, we need to go visit my mom. We just got to figure it out. And we're hoping to fly out of Scotts Bluff.
Well, and trains are dangerous too. Just this morning, did you hear about what happened in India? They had a massive
the train
derailment, killed 300 plus people.
Massive.
That is terrible.
Yeah.
Absolutely terrible. So it's.
And even though I like driving, I don't really like doing the 28-hour car ride back to New York anymore.
I don't know. I love car rides.
Okay, well, you can drive us and I'll sleep in the back.
There
we go. And you'd have a free place to stay, so there you go. So anyway, back to our story. When World War II started, Scotts Bluff said to the government, hey, we got an airport out here, and you can use it for military and defense purposes. The government was all, yeah, okay. And on September 5th, 1942, an announcement was made that Scotts Bluff was selected to be one of 7 Nebraska satellite air bases. So did you know that? We had 7 air bases out here during World War II.
I could believe it. We just didn't know what was going to go on.
Yeah. According to Wikipedia, the original Scotts Bluff Municipal Airport closed to make way for the new airfield. And the old airport later became a prisoner of war camp, and that's a story I want to do as well. I got a book over here on my shelf about POW camps out here, one of which was a really, really big German POW camp up at Fort Robinson. So construction began quickly, and 28 farms were purchased for use at the site for the new airfield. And when I say construction began quickly, it was literally 2 days later on September 2nd. So they're like, yeah, you can have it, start building.
They had the bulldozers ready.
Yeah, and I suspect there were lots of backroom deals going on if they were able to start 2 days later.
Oh, yeah.
Because I've sat in on enough city council meetings and airport authority board meetings and commissioner meetings that they're like, yes, you can do this. You get the bid for this. To start 2 days later, everybody knew this was going to happen. So they all got to work rather quickly, and in 45 days, 3 runways consisting of 600,000 cubic yards or 460,000 cubic meters of concrete were constructed or were poured. There were also 108 buildings on site, including the hangar, warehouses, officers' quarters, barracks, and mess halls. There was, if I remember correctly, too, there was 2 mess halls, one for officers, one for enlisted. Yeah. There was also a bomb site storage building and a camouflage interaction building. In October of that year, a temporary railroad spur was constructed. When I learned that many years ago, I kind of wish that they had kept that spur, because imagine if you had a light rail system to the airport from town.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not that it's far away, but it would still be useful today, and I would use it, even if they had it like in downtown Scottsbluff. That's a very easy trip for someone, for your neighbor to give you a ride to downtown Scottsbluff, which is like a mile from my house, and you hop on a light rail out to the airport. It's not an inconvenience to ask your friends to give you a lift to the airport. It's what, 15 minutes out there?
Well, and was there a bus station? Because I know that time buses were largely taking over trains.
I didn't find anything. I didn't find anything about bus stations. I'm not saying there weren't, but I'm not sure. But I just thought it would have been cool if they had kept that light rail.
Oh, absolutely.
But after World War II, we turned into a car economy. So
we really did.
Yeah.
Because that's when the highways were starting to be built and finished up, and we really did.
So the Scottsbluff Army Airfield was the satellite to the air base in Casper, Wyoming, and the first troops arrived in Scottsbluff on December 4th, 1942. The U.S. Army then spent $5.5 million building the airport in 1943, and if you do that today, it would cost about $125 million. And that's just for the airport. We're not talking the outlying buildings. And
you're in how many years left till the end of the war?
Yeah, it's 1943, so... the Scottsbluff Army Airfield, like the one in Alliance, was a training base during World War II, and it was meant to train the crews of B-17 Flying Fortresses and consolidated B-24 Liberator bombers from the 2nd Air Force. Scottsbluff was the final training spot for the folks from Casper, and once the training was completed, everyone was assigned to the 4190th Army Air Forces Base Unit. So at least if you come across somebody that says, hey, I trained in Scottsbluff, you know what unit they ended up in, because that's where they all went. So a year later, in 1944, the 2nd Air Force transferred command to the 1st Troop Carrier Command, making Scottsbluff a satellite of the Alliance Airfield. They changed the trainings to C-47s and gliders, and the War Department closed the airfield on December 31st, 1945. In July 1947, the War Assets Administration awarded the airfield to the city of Scottsbluff to convert it into a municipal airport, and the government sold whatever buildings and structures were not included to other entities, and most of those were removed. The military continued to use the airport for training until 1950, and then the airport is still of interest to our and other militaries because of crosswinds. So this is kind of that hint that I gave in the before. In the before. I should really do this when I've not been up all night.
In the before time.
Yeah.
Not the after times.
I remember one day coming back from doing an interview in Scottsbluff for an article for the paper, and I saw this big green plane flying overhead. I didn't know what kind of plane it was, but I knew it was a military plane. So I called up the director of the airport and left a message, and I was just like, hey man, what's going on? And I got back to my desk at the paper, and I got a call from one of the board members, and he says to me, he goes, get to the airport right now. And I go, is this about the plane? And he goes, yes, have you seen it? And I go, yes, what is it? He goes, get to the airport right now. Okay, so I dropped everything, got back in the car. 20 minutes later, I'm interviewing servicemen from the Brazilian military. They came up here specifically for the winds to do training because they were searching for an airport somewhere in the world where their pilots could get training on crosswinds. And apparently we have some wicked crosswinds up here.
Yes,
so
we do.
They've been up here several times. That was the first time they were up here, but they've been up here many times since then because the partnership has just worked out really, really well.
So for our viewers who don't know, what are crosswinds? I mean, I know what you mean, but I mean,
Go ahead and explain it.
Entertain our viewers. So I guess it's when a wind current from the north to the south meets one from the east to the west, or vice versa, and they basically they come together. This is why we have so many bad storms. But as far as air current and pressurization, I've seen a really cool scene where I've seen a prop propeller stall in midair. You could see him flying, and he wasn't going anywhere. He was literally in midair, prop going and everything, but he wasn't moving because of the crosswinds. He wasn't going forward, backward, upward, or down. He was just suspended in midair.
Wow.
So those are kind of the weird phenomenon that you can experience here. Also, one of the reasons why the Hot Air Balloon Festival is up here, because it kind of makes, I think, an interesting challenge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because you'll see these, we had one last year that landed in the Menards parking lot, right on top of a car.
Seriously?
So, yep, seriously, because you get these crosswinds. But that's what you have to experience around here. So one moment it'll be going from east to west, the next moment it'll be going north to south. So you never quite know. Go fly kites. That's what I say.
Okay. I was gonna say I've seen birds stuck in the crosswind, but I've never seen a plane stuck in one.
Yeah, I saw a plane do that exact same thing. It was just stuck. It was weird. Yeah, it was so bizarre, but it was really fun to see.
Now I want to see it happen. Mm-hmm. So back to our story. The Western Airlines DC-3s were at Scottsbluff by 1945, and then United in 53 to 54. They were both gone by 59 and replaced by Frontier, which remained until 84. I remember when I moved here in 2007, they were struggling quite a bit, and then they were starting to do really well under United, and then we get COVID, and they're struggling again. So the airport chugs along until 1970, when ownership was transferred to Scottsbluff County. They operated the airport as the William B. Heelig Field right up until present day. And I hope I pronounced his name right, because there's a big sign out front with his name on it. So Heelig was a World War II U.S. Army Air Force primary flight instructor. And he was also a civilian flight instructor and the manager of the airport. So it kind of makes sense to name that whole place out there after him. Mm-hmm. In 2003, the county created the Airport Authority Board, which I must say was the most interesting of all the boring board and city council meetings I had to attend when I worked at the paper. One of the things I liked about them was they kept on point. You know, here's our agenda. They went through the agenda. They're not wanting to be there all day with their meeting. Get through their story. When they were done, hey, Irene, did you hear about such and such? No? All right, well, you need to call Connor. He knows about that. Okay. Yeah. I would leave with several stories just from the meeting, and then I would have a ton of story tips as well. They were really nice to me the whole time, too, and they loved it when I came to do stories, and I think it's because I didn't just do a story on, hey, the airport board met today. These are the things they discussed. Have a nice day. Mm-hmm. I would actually take the things that they discussed and turn it into a story. Instead of just saying, oh, they put a bid out on a new fire truck. Because, I'd be like, well, why do y'all need a fire truck out here? Where's it at? What's it look like? Why do you need a new one? And then I'd have a whole story about a fire truck. There you go. So, of course, the board's going to love that, but I also got lots of emails from people that said, hey, that's really cool because we didn't even know that was going on out there. So most of the other council meetings, you want to put pencils in your ears and just like rupture your eardrums and never have to go cover it again. Yeah. Anyway, they make all the improvements to the entire site, including the wildlife fencing, remodeling the airport fire station and the new terminal, the Donald E. Overman Terminal, which was completed in 2005. Don was the board president when I was there. He was a pretty cool dude, and we should probably get his son Mark, who's the county sheriff, to come and talk about his dad. His dad was into politics, and he took me to his office one day, and he's got pictures with all these national figures over time and is just chatting to me. Did you know this? Did you know this? Did you know this? This was right after an airport board meeting, and so I would get, the meetings were usually, I think, 10 to 11. I'd be done with the story by noon. Mm-hmm. Here I am sitting with Don till like 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Still didn't have anything done. Got a text from my editor. Are you coming back today? I'm like, oh, yeah. I'm working on something else. Yeah. And all I was doing was sitting in Don's office BSing with him. So, privileges of a reporter.
There you go.
Anyway, so some of the more famous people who flew here and are from the area are Jane Fleesbaugh, Chester H. Fleesbaugh, and Byron M. Johnson. There are several other folks that I would get to, too, that were pilots, but these are probably the most famous. Jane served in World War II in the Women's Air Service Pilots, known as WASPs, in 1943. The WASPs were difficult to get into. There were 25,000 women who had applied, but only 1,830 were chosen. Of those, 1,074 graduated, and they flew more than 60 million miles with 43 dying in service. And I should have done the math on the low percentage of acceptance, but 25,000 and less than 2,000 are accepted. Yeah. That's pretty selective. And Jane Fleesbaugh from Scottsbluff, Nebraska got accepted.
Yeah. I can only imagine between, the prejudices back then towards women and what it just naturally took to be a pilot. Even as a man to be a pilot, you had to be remarkable with their eyesight. Yep. And you had impeccable eyesight, the ability to take high G's without passing out, and all that kind of stuff. So It is not easy to be a pilot.
And I've got a small file on Jane that one day I would like to do a story on her, but I need time to put all. It's like I'm searching for something, and here's some info on Jane. Put it in the file. Here's some more info. So I actually have to go through, read it, sort it out, and figure out what I'm going to do. But I think she'd be an interesting story to do. Chester Fleesbaugh served as a naval aviator.
Naval aviator.
Thank you. From 1941 to 1945. He was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross with 7 stars, and after the war he started Prairie Airlines with Chris Abbott, and they operated flights to the eastern end of the state for 26 years. And that's still one of the things that I hear people here. They want flights back to the eastern end of the state so they don't have to drive 6 or 7 hours.
Makes sense.
And if I was rich, I'd start up a small charter airplane and charter folks out, starting with Husker weekends.
There you go.
And then once I make enough money, then, have midweek flights too. But I'm not rich.
Those small planes scare me. I've had several friends tell me about some of their experiences, and I don't quite know about that.
I didn't say I'd be flying on them.
Well, I want more of this future that they keep talking about. Like I went back to Dubai and all those places where they have basically giant drones with the, 8 quad helicopter things where going to just kind of hover and just kind of lightly land. I'd be okay with that. I don't need those supersonic jets.
I think I'd rather take a jet than that.
I don't know.
But we'll see.
We'll see.
We might make it to the future yet.
Yeah.
So Chester also spent 15 years as a member of the Nebraska Aeronautics Commission and helped found the Panhandle Soarers Glider Club. In 1995, he qualified as a helicopter pilot when he was 77 years old.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I read that sentence 4 or 5 times when I came across it, and I was like, really? Wow. So he was pretty much flying anything that he could, and he was inducted into the Nebraska Aviation Hall of Fame in 2000. Byron Johnson was from Potter, which is just south of here. He was also a U.S. Navy aviator. He left college after the bombing of Pearl Harbor to enlist in the Navy, and believe it or not, I've come across stuff like that a lot. Even going back to the Civil War, I forget the gentleman's name now. His family's very rich. He's at an Ivy League school, and the Civil War starts, and he's like, yeah, dude, slavery's wrong. And he quits college, and he goes to fight in the war. And so, nothing's changed in 150 years.
Well, especially when drafts were involved, because at the time, the only really way to get out of the draft is if you were the only male and you were in charge of your family, or if you were highly educated. That was really the only other way. And so these people had the way out being Ivy League students. They didn't have to go to war, but they still knew that from the draft that it was only fair that they got put into service too.
So Byron was trained as a fighter pilot, and he is most famous because he was the subject of one of the most published photographs of World War II. The photo was taken on November 10th, 1943, and in it you can see him crash landing his Grumman F-6F Hellcat onto the aircraft carrier USS Enterprise. And the only reason I know what his plane's name was is because I've looked at the picture and the caption underneath it told me what kind of plane it was. But it is this spectacular photo that if you see it, you're like, oh yeah, I've seen that. Well, that was Byron from Potter.
Oh, wow.
So Lieutenant Walter L. Tuning jumped through the flames of that wreck and released the cockpit door so Byron could escape. Byron received the title of Ace in 1944 after shooting down 8 enemy aircraft, and after being discharged, he returned to college and started an airport in Sydney. He was a lawyer until he retired, and he is also in the Nebraska Aviation Hall of Fame. He was inducted in 1991, and he died in 2005 at age 84. So the next time you're driving down the highway out here in western Nebraska or anywhere in the United States and you see a historical marker, stop and take a look.
Yes.
There are stories of ordinary people on these signs. There's stories of phenomenal events on these signs. And if you're in an airport anywhere, have a look around the history that's presented to you.
Absolutely. Do it.
These stories are everywhere. I wasn't even looking for these stories when I stumbled upon them, and I was like, I don't know anything about this crash in Chapel. I need to look this up.
Yeah.
And then it wasn't quite enough to make a full episode, but I knew that Alliance and Scottsbluff had been military airports during World War II, that I could put the 3 together and make a story out of it. So if you just take the time to stop and reflect and learn about, what came here before you, you might be surprised and spend some time thinking about people that came before you.
Absolutely.
So that's it for us today. Thank you for listening to Storytelling on the Plains.
We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Storytelling on the Plains, a podcast about the history of western Nebraska. If you enjoyed this episode, visit our website, storytellingontheplains.com, where you can subscribe to the show through a variety of podcast hosts so you never miss an episode. If you'd like to support the podcast, Visit patreon.com/storytellingontheplains, where you can get the episodes early and bonus content. You can also help promote the show by sharing the podcast with others, posting social media, or leaving us a rating on Apple Podcasts. Until next time, thanks for listening to Storytelling on the Plains.